Gigi, what about you? What's your view on independents and their role in Parliament?
Well, I wouldn't just say independents are potentially important this election, but anybody who's not one of the major parties. And the reason is I very much agree with the blokes on either side that diversity is a source of strength in a democracy. And we've seen that in the most recent historical example of the last couple of years, when we've seen the most catastrophic betrayal of the Australian people in terms of poor health policy management that I've ever seen in Australia. I think that we've seen for a generation, and we're going to be carrying the cost of that for a generation. And that's down to both major parties and their supporters, the Greens and the Nationals. Sorry, gentlemen. And so I think that, the obvious thing to do is to put everybody else first and the two majors and two supporting people last on the ballot, because Saturday is the Australian people's opportunity to pay back for the betrayals of the last 2 years. And it'll be the independents and it'll be all the what we call freedom-friendly minor parties. So UAP, IMOP, Australian Federation Party, all these other ones, they've all been popping up for a very good reason, which is that people who think that a monoculture and a single way of doing things is the right approach have abused that power and have crushed people's dreams in this country and set us back hugely that we'll be feeling for a generation.
We will be coming back to this issue. Gigi?
I tend to agree. It's politically expedient to say this, of course. And this is what we see every election in Australia, right? What gets votes is someone who seems to be somewhat, self-deprecating and also appeals to the pocketbook of the voter. And I'm sure we'll be talking about those policy proposals right now, and they're pointing to things that are about the pocketbook. And they're trying to distract away from the real issue, which is that for the last 2 years, we've had mismanagement from both big parties.
Well, Gigi, I can see you itching to get in here. Look, we know you do have strong views about what's happened in the past when it comes to COVID, but we need to acknowledge, as the government regularly reminds us, we still have managed one of the lowest death rates, one of the best performing economies through this pandemic, haven't we?
Australia, the lucky country yet again. And the luck that we have had in our demography and our geography is what has allowed the major parties to construct the false narrative that what they have done in terms of these incredibly destructive lockdowns has been what has saved us. That's just not true. And I have an analysis out right now that we just released last week, which is a cost-benefit analysis of the lockdown policies and the border closures that were implemented. It's something that the government should have done. I've been calling for the government to do it for 2 years. The executive summary is downloadable on thegreatcovidpanic.com/news, and it shows that the costs of these decisions that were made, but not just by the Commonwealth government, but in many states as well, including here in Melbourne, in Victoria and in Western Australia by the Labor people in charge, have actually cost Australia 30 times or more than they could possibly have delivered in terms of benefits. And
so the benefit of 40,000 lives saved that James Patterson and the government talk about, why is that wrong in your view?
It's wrong because it comes from a computer simulation rather than an actual look at the data that we now have.
And is yours a computer simulation?
No, mine is based on empirical data from around the world, including other places that have not had lockdowns. And I would say, if you just look at what we were being told 2 years ago, or even a year ago, we had, we were saying, oh, yes, we have to lock down because COVID is a horrible threat. Look at all the infections and deaths. The questioner is correct. The infections and deaths now are astronomically higher, and yet somehow it's basically what's become obvious is it's no longer politically expedient to talk about that.
We're vaccinated now, though, is the difference, isn't it?
We're vaccinated, and we're still dying. So you tell me, how does that make sense? I mean, I think what's happening is right now we're having the wave that we would have had 2 years ago. And so, yes, some people have gotten a couple of extra years of life, but we're not going to be, we're just basically having to pay those costs now. And yes, we have some people who are vaccinated. It's lovely we have the vaccine. It's lovely we have early treatments. We have lots of options to deal with it. We had lots of options even a year ago, including the early treatments. And we have not been focusing on human well-being. If we ever needed proof that the major parties have prioritized political expediency over the welfare of the human population here in Australia, it's been the last 2 years. And that's why they need to go to the bottom of the ballot.
Well, Peter, does Gigi have a point?
Well, I'm curious. So the number of people dying now, you're suggesting, would have been... The number of deaths is the same if we'd not had the lockdowns. Is that what you're saying?
Our best guess is that the number of people's lives saved by the lockdowns is around 10,000. And when I say saved, I mean postponed, right? A death always happens to everyone. The average COVID death, unfortunately, is amongst the people who are elderly. So it's usually someone who's over 80 with comorbidities. They have about 3 to 5 years of life left to live. And we have saved, perhaps, using our analysis, which is based on data, we have perhaps saved 10,000 people's...
Well, just on that, don't you concede that saving 10,000 lives is something that a lot of Australians would think is probably a good idea?
Yes, but this is the question. What is the cost of doing that savings? Does not it count that we have ruined a generation of children's education? We've disrupted children's education for 2 years, and we've killed our mental health. We have disrupted families. We've crowded out other health care. And our whole point in this cost-benefit analysis is that you cannot just look at benefits. You cannot. That's inhumane.
10,000 lives is a
pretty
substantial benefit, though, isn't it?
Well, what about 20,000 lives? What about 30,000?
Well, that's pretty substantial too.
You have to count costs and benefits in the same currency, David.
Well, can I ask a
question? And if you don't, then you are really ignoring the other kinds of suffering that happen directly because of lockdowns.
Can I ask a question? What is the currency you're using to equate life and death?
Yep. Great question.
Dollars?
Great question. So there is a whole literature on this, and I'm very happy to share with you the whole cost-benefit analysis.
How much time do we have?
145 pages long.
No, we don't have much time.
So you have to use currencies which are able to pick up the kinds of damage that have happened and also the benefits that might have happened, right, from the policy choices. And so we choose 2 different currencies. One of them is dollars, and you are able to measure some things in dollars, but the more meaningful one is human well-being. And so we use something called the Well-Being Life Year.
We're going to... All right, Gigi, what sort of reform would you have liked to have heard from the two?
Oh, boy. I mean, it's been 2 years of propaganda and treating everybody like imbeciles. I think that what we would really like to see is a return to happy, free, joyful Australia, get rid of all the freedom restrictions that we've seen in the last 2 years, including all the mandates and the coercion and the border closures and the testing and the tracking and the tracing and the masking. All that stuff's got to go. It doesn't help. It doesn't help on net. And so it's not worth it. The government still has not defended it except by these, 40,000 figures that come out of a computer box. And it hasn't done a cost-benefit analysis. You shouldn't trust them. So I think we should see more freedom. We should see more critical thought. I'd like to see some reform in education. I'd like to see universal basic childcare. And I'd like to see more support for Australia being a strong country that allows its businesses and its people to have freedom and commits to not ever taking it away.
Peter Hartcher, going to